Sara, Payne, Hayden, Women's Air Force Service Pilots, WASP or WASPs as they're known. I interviewed Sara in Methuen, Massachusetts, April 2nd, 2008. She was about 88 years old at the time and recently has just passed away at the age of 99. Sara has a rare story. The Women's Air Force Service Pilots, they were organized to help the combat pilots continue their roles in their combat missions and allow the women to take up some of the slack. So they were test pilots for the new aircraft. They ferried aircraft and they actually trained pilots. 2,500 women applied in 1943, only 800 completed the training. And the group only lasted 16 months. They disbanded in December of 1944. But what a story that she has to tell. And I'm proud to be able to share this story with you. Angie Simmons, thank you again for sponsoring a story. You have a heart for women that have served. And I thank you, Angie, for making it possible for many others to hear Sara's unique and awesome story. So I'm excited to bring this to you because, like I said, she's like a gem. These 800 pilots are like rare coins, you know, that were made, and I have one of the stories. So a very rare and unique breed, just like the Tuskegee Airmen were. So, okay, I'm happy to share her complete story with you now. So bring the grandkids, the kids around, and let's just share and listen and reminisce of Sara Hayden's story. And I thank you for watching my Voices of History channel and sharing these videos. God bless you, and I'll talk to you soon.
1944.
Did you enlist?
Do you want to know how I got in, or?
Yeah, tell me how you got in.
Well, I actually didn't go into the military because there was no military for women at that time, women pilots. Yeah. And if we go back to those earlier years and the beginning of the war, the only way for anybody to get any news was to read the newspaper or the radio. There was no such thing as television, and we had none. However, if one went to the movies, they did have a newsreel that went along with the movie that was showing at the time. So I suppose all of the ladies or women, most of us I know, were all being very patriotic and wanted to join something. And I went to the movies one night, and there was a newsreel showing women ferrying airplanes. And I took a look at that and I said, now that's what I want to do. And so I made a great effort to go to the recruiting station immediately the next day, and they had never heard of women pilots, of course. It took me probably maybe at least 4 to 6 months to even find out anything about the program. How'd these women ever get there? When I finally found out about it, I found out that the requirements were, at that time, that just to apply to get into the program, you had to have 35 hours of flying time already. Well, that left me in a bind because I didn't have any money and I had not ever been in an airplane. And this was a problem. But I worked in an office, which is the Roofing, Heating, and Sheet Metal Company in North Carolina, and it was a 2-person office. And the lady in there said, I think that our company should loan you the money to learn to fly, which the price was to rent a Cub, $4 an hour, and with an instructor, $6 an hour. And then too, gas was rationed. You had to have permission to use the gasoline and go through all of this business. So there were other requirements, of course, along with that. When they first set up the program, which was back in 1942, yes, they were looking. The first persons that went into women pilots were what was called the Women's auxiliary ferrying service. In those days, women were either auxiliary or something, never straightforward standing on their own 2 feet or flying. But they hired 28 of those women, and then they set up the training program. And to begin with, those women had to have 200 hours of flying time just to apply, to learn how to fly. And they didn't, I think we had maybe 1,000 women registered pilots at that time, certainly not qualified pilots. And that didn't work for long because you couldn't find that many women. So they reduced it to 100, then 75. And by the time I got in, 35 hours that you had to pay for yourself. And of course it was a good thing. I expect that the Army Air Corps was not going to waste money on sending a woman out to learn to fly if she couldn't do it or something. So you're going to pay for it yourself, along with paying for our own transportation and the whole business. They didn't give us anything. And but eventually, going through the whole process of getting in there, I think it was about the last, oh, by the way, we trained 8 classes that graduated in 1943 and 10 classes in 1944, which would, by every WASP that you will ever see, you'll be seeing a number beside of their name, like 43-1 or 43-7, and then you get to 44-1. So this is a designation by class, and this is why that number is there, so that we also knew, we can immediately look and see who has been in the longest and who had the most experience and who got out and to do all the good things that they were taught to do. I was the first one, I think it was the last 2 classes that set up to take the aviation cadet exam that the men had to take to get accepted to be an aviation cadet. So they finally got around to thinking they better give this to the women too. So I was the only first woman in Charlotte, North Carolina, of course, who had ever taken that exam. And they weren't allowed to grade it. They had to send that to Washington. The whole program was set up to be, first of all, to see if women could be trained as military pilots. And the second thing was to have women replace the men pilots for combat duty. And then the third thing was to help out not taking all of what they called the cream of the manpower. In those days, the top people were taken into the aviation cadet training, and they wanted to reduce that. And if the women could do some of these jobs, then they would reduce the demand for the men. And so there was one thing that the program was, which even these 3 things would indicate, and that is that it was experimental. And it certainly was very experimental, because once they got us in there, you see, we were not under the military. Everything we did was under military orders, but we were not under their jurisdiction, basically. So that if they wanted us to go fly and do something that they didn't want to ask the men to do, they could ask us to do it, and we weren't going to say a word. And there wasn't anything they could do about it, you see. And there was one program that the men were complaining about, and that was towing the targets in North Carolina at Camp Davis, where they were targets were being shot at with live ammunition for practice. And the airplanes that they were using to tow the targets weren't in the best condition either. So remember, everything in World War II was coming up to grade because nothing was ready. And the men complained about that, so they sent over some women to do the tow targeting for a while. They did. They didn't say anything about it. They just went up there and did it, that's all. And when you look back, of course, there was a certain amount of discrimination, but it didn't bother us. We didn't know the difference. We didn't care. And as far as the training goes, we had the exact same training, and probably the training may have been stricter for the women than it was for the male cadets, because they did not allow us to have any help whatsoever in getting in and out of an airplane, or anything that had to be done to the airplane. We had to do it ourselves. And if you couldn't, you were just out. I'm told, in looking back at our history, that there were 25,000 women who applied to get into this program. Now, where they all came from, or whether they all had flight training, I have no earthly idea. But out of that number, they accepted 1,830 just for training. And out of that 1,830, we graduated 1,074. That does not include the 28 original ferry pilots that they hired, who eventually they were all put together, you know, as to the WASP as you know them now. When they sent us out for training, we were known as the Women's Flight Training Detachment, or something, you know, as an auxiliary program. In other words, it wasn't just flat military training. And so this is what we were known as, and they didn't have the name until when they started doing things other than ferrying aircraft, such as towing targets and doing the other required jobs that the Air Force, the Air Corps had. Then this is when they came up then in 1943, I think in the summer of 43, with the name of Women Air Force Service Pilots. So we finally had our own name. But Air Force, as you notice in our name, is one word, because there was no Air Force in World War II. So this is one word, which is, well, it's one of those things these days, if you want to do anything on the computer and put it in as one word, the computer will holler at you. You got that one wrong, for whatever it does. And, after training, I went and I had a shorter tour of duty than I would have liked. I went to Randolph Air Force Base with the engineering, and this was to the aircraft that had been used by the cadets had sometimes been damaged, and they had ground looped it, or they had to put in a new engine, or put on a new wing, or put in something new. Anyhow, it had to be repaired. So when it was repaired, it had to be checked out on the ground very thoroughly. And this is what my job was, to check the airplane on the ground. And we certainly got a very thorough, trained eye on looking for the nuts and the bolts, and everything was tight and no frayed cables. It had to be checked and ready to fly, because we're the one that had to take it up and fly it. In other words, test fly the thing. Then it could be put back on the ground to be safe for the cadets to train in. So this is what I had to do for a while. And where do you want me to go from here?
No, okay, so I'm trying to get a feel for what you did when you did it. So you're a test pilot for these planes?
Well, I was a test pilot, and not, you know, for the larger things, just for the planes that were repaired and had to be put back into service.
Where were you doing this at again?
Randolph Field. It was Randolph Field. It's Randolph Air Force Base now in San Antonio, Texas.
Was this dangerous work?
I'm sorry?
Dangerous work? Is this a dangerous job that you had to do?
I don't know that, well, you weren't being shot at. On the other hand,
No, but I mean...
but the thing is, it's a very necessary job. Anytime you test something that's been repaired, you don't know if it's going to work or not.
Exactly.
So you have to be very thorough in your inspection of the thing on the ground. And if I'm the one that's going to fly it, and the only one that's going to fly it, after I inspect it on the ground, if I'm the only one that's going to fly it, it better be ready to go. And so there is, the only danger would be is if you happen, I just never heard of any one of us being careless. It's something that it's not allowed. You're not going to do it. In other words, if you're going to go out and get in a car and drive it, you're going to be sure that thing's going to run. You're not going to jump in there and have it blow up when you start it. I mean, there could be, some amount of danger involved.
But is this a new aircraft, or is it?
No, this is an aircraft that had been damaged and repaired. Although, now some of the other ladies who were in early and ferried airplanes, and they ferried the airplanes from the factory, brand new ones, to where they were to be used either as training or in combat or something. We were not allowed to go out of the country. But just this year, I didn't know our history that well, but this year I have learned more about one of the ladies who took off from it was a small airfield in, I think it may be the Los Angeles airport now, but it was smaller then, in World War II, and she took off from that field in 1944. I'm not sure the day, it might have been November, in a P-51, and it was a new aircraft. And I understand that there were 4 or 5 of those airplanes, and the others took off. They were ferrying those aircraft somewhere. I guess they were getting ready to take them overseas for combat or something. And hers had a problem of some sort, and so she was waited until that was refixed. And when she took off, she left that airport and has not been seen or heard from since. So we actually have one missing in action. And that airplane has not been found, and neither has she. And this is 2008. And her family has just now, you see, they did not give us a discharge when they kicked us out and said quit flying. We were not issued any discharge because we were paid by civil service, not the military, so they didn't give us a discharge. And we still have to, the way they set the whole thing up when they recognized our service is that each individual or the family has to apply for this discharge. And this is what I do now. I'm the Veterans Affairs person for our WASP, and I know how to fill out the forms, the application to apply for the discharge, and I have filled out the form, and the person who is asking for it is a grand niece of, her name is Gertrude, well, her last name, Gertrude Silver, is her last name. I mean, that's who she is now. She took off in that airplane and has not been seen or heard from since, but her family is just now getting the discharge for her. In the meantime, there are no benefits at all, and she's been lost in action all these many years. I think they're planning a good-sized memorial for her out in California coming up this fall in November. And this is the only way that they can even have recognition for her, is to go through this process. Okay. So when you want to know if the other people did have dangerous jobs, yes, and hers certainly was dangerous enough in that it was a new aircraft and probably had some defect of some sort.
So how many women served in World War II? Do you know approximately, you're saying?
How many women altogether? I just know our own group. Yeah. Our own group, there were, who served were, who earned their wings was 1,074, and the ones who were hired, that was 28. So if you add those two together, you will get the total number of WASP. That does not include the ones who trained, who are also eligible for getting a discharge. There were 1,830 of those, by the way. So the difference in the ones that trained and didn't earn their wings is whatever, I can't subtract fast enough. 1,830 minus 1,074 would be the total.
Well, it's interesting. You say you're 88 now, right?
I'm sorry?
You're 88 years old?
Oh, yes.
You don't look it at all.
So I'm told. Well,
yeah, but
yeah.
are these memories of World War II fading, or are they still like yesterday sometimes?
Some of it's still like yesterday, especially the ones where we were in training and where we were. We knew that the ladies that we were in training with, we knew them probably better than we knew our own family, or would ever know our own family. In fact, I think some of them, we were very, very close, and we lived. The first ones that went into training, by the way, were sent to Houston, Texas. They had no barracks or anything for them, and no place for them to live. They had not anticipated having these kind of women there, so that the one in charge of where they would be housed had to find them a place to stay out in the community. So she would usually find something. I think in those days they had boarding houses, or places. They didn't just live in apartments. They had boarding houses or someplace. So she had to find quarters for those in maybe a place like that. But what they did was send an Army vehicle, something like an old Army truck of some sort, out each morning to pick these ladies up and take them off. So I imagine that caused quite a few comments around the community. And what are these girls doing here? They weren't allowed to say that we're taking them off here to learn to fly airplanes. So I expect that created a lot of commotion in those days. But then after about 3 or 4 months, they had the Avenger Field at Sweetwater, Texas, was available. So everybody went there for training from then on. And the training, yes, it was, well, you don't forget things like you marched to class. You had the bugle that woke you up in the morning, and everybody marched to the mess hall, and you marched from there back to class. They trained flying half of the class at one time while the other half was in ground school, so that you actually, there were 109 or 10 in my class. You actually only knew half of the class because you were with them constantly, day and night, for 6 months. And so we do have good memories of those trainings, and of course we always knew what each one was doing, and how she was doing in the flying, and whether somebody didn't pass a check ride that day and they weren't there the next day. We still know these people very closely, and I think any of the WASP know their classmates better than some of the others. But by doing what I do, I've learned to know a lot of the other WASP. In fact, one of my best friends was B-36 pilot. She was one of the bomber pilots, and she lived in Billerica, Massachusetts. And she's been gone about 6 or 7 years now, greatly missed. So we could share stories after we got out, and our memory of what went on in training and what we did while we were there is very fresh.
Yes. Tell me the importance of women in the military yesterday and even today, and the importance of recognizing them.
The importance of?
Well, it's first the importance of women in the military. I mean, back then it's kind of like people didn't realize there were women in World War II that were in the service, especially doing what you did.
Yes.
And even today, I mean, how important is that role in our military for women?
Well, we didn't recognize the importance of our role then, because we just figured, okay, we're going to learn to fly and we're going to do what the men did. But it didn't work out that way, because when they closed the program, which was December the 20th, 1944, they closed that program and they just said, go home. There was no, they didn't even pay our way to get home. And I know in my case, I was at Randolph Field, and you couldn't even have transportation home unless you could catch a flight. They did allow us to catch one of their military planes that was, I think, going to somewhere in North Carolina. if it was going to where you needed to go, you could get on it if you could hurry up and get on at the end of that day. That's the way it was. And by the way, we had 38 killed on active duty, which is the one that I was describing. They still haven't found. It was one of those 38. And the government didn't even pay to ship the body home at all. And so, in other words, in 1944 and for some number of years thereafter, the women were not important, and they didn't consider them important. They didn't even recognize our service until we got recognition by going to Congress in 1977, before they recognized that we had served. And but in the meantime, the Navy, I think it was 1972, started training a couple of the women directly into their Navy pilots program. And so once they closed our program, it's the only group of women who were trained as military pilots as a group. And after that, it was all individual service training, such as the Navy, and then the Air Force and Army followed that. And of course, little by little, as the women have still had to fight for recognition, they would not allow the military pilots into combat for quite a while either. But because we had to prove that women could do the job, just the same as the men, they have built on that. And fortunately, but it's been really a struggle for the women to be able to do these same jobs. They're finally being recognized now. And the WASP recognized that when these younger women started coming out of training in the regular branches of the service as pilots. We knew that they had to have some sort of an organization, because we had finally established one. It took us 20 years after we got out to become the WASP organization that we are now, and just start to get them together. So we knew they needed an organization. So we did set up one for them called Women Military Aviators Incorporated, and we incorporated that in Massachusetts, by the way, in 1986 it was. And these pilots who belong to this organization now are the ones that are going out into space. They're doing all of these things that the women are capable of doing and want to do. And so we have sort of just, I guess you said, we're history, we paved the way for them, but we didn't know we were doing it.
That's important, yeah. Let me ask you a question. I asked all the World War II veterans about our country. Sara, what does freedom mean to you?
What does freedom mean to me? It means that I can do what I am capable of doing. If I want to do this, if I do it with some amount of consideration for the people it affects, I do not wish to impose my thinking and beliefs on other people either. I think that, but I don't think that freedom should be taken for granted. Freedom should be taken with responsibility that goes with it. And I think that everybody is responsible for their own actions to some extent, and of course there are plenty of outside influences. But at least they have the freedom to complain and holler about it. This is one thing that we learned, I think, even though we weren't military, we behaved as military, and we always had something to complain about. I don't think anybody would ever be in any military organization without a complaint. And if there isn't a good rumor going on, we'd start one, and did. But on the other hand, as you get away from that and look back, but these days I do feel that freedom is not really free. We have to maintain it, and we have to have responsibilities that go with it.
What about the price for freedom? What would you tell a young person today who was born in a free country about the price or the cost for freedom?
The price of freedom? You may be called upon to do a job you don't want to do, and you have to pay the price. I don't see any way of getting around that. I think if you want to go into the service, there's no way of getting around the realization that you're not going to be the one that's shot down or the one that is killed in action, but it is a possibility. And I think that, well, I don't know. All of us, in my group at least, we just wanted to do what we needed to do. And we were going to do it, and we never gave the rest of it any thought. And if you go into the service with the expectation that somebody's going to throw a grenade under you or do something, I don't think that you can live with that. I think that you have to go in with the understanding that you're so busy doing your job that you really don't, this stays in the back of your mind. You don't put it forward to the extent that you'd be afraid to do something. I've asked people have asked me, aren't you afraid to fly? Or weren't you afraid to do that? I was too busy. I never, the fear never entered my mind. I was just simply too busy doing what I had to do. And of course there were times if you had an airplane quit and you were flying, you're going to get that thing on the ground. Yeah, you can't sit up there and get scared to death that you don't know what to do, because you better be knowing how to do it.
Sara, tell me what the American flag means and represents to you as a veteran.
I honor that flag totally. I do not see it with any disrespect. I don't like to see it on the ground. Well, I guess it comes under the thing that I have done funerals for our women veterans, and one of the things is that we present the flag to the family, the flag under which the person served, and the flag under which I served is my flag. And I honor it totally and completely.
Are you proud that you're a World War II veteran?
Am I proud? Oh, I certainly am. And I'm certainly glad I didn't miss that opportunity either. Because imagine that was only a one-time opportunity. I would never have known the difference. I do not know what prompted me to decide I wanted to fly. And I don't really have any idea how I managed to get through that program and get my wings. It's just one of those things that was continuous, and I think I was very fortunate to do that. And yes, I'm very proud to have served, and I am proud of all of our women veterans who serve. I still am. I'm very proud of them.
Good. Have people thanked you over the years for your service?
I would say more so in the last 10 or 15 or so years, since it seems that people now recognize the fact that there are not going to be too many of these World War II veterans around. And so if they do have stories to tell, and a lot of them, I haven't been in combat. I haven't been on one of the ships that was, I know I have met some of the veterans that have been on ships that were sunk, and they're survivors. They have my total respect and admiration. And I think that where the women came in basically is that we were able to support the efforts of the others who did go into combat. And of course you have to stick to one thing, and the pilots and so on, that we were able to give them support in our country, on the ground, in the air, and do the jobs so that they could be free to do theirs. And it was an opportunity that I just totally appreciate having had. A great thing.
Sara, what should our country remember about World War II?
Well, I don't know whether there's a lot to remember or a lot to learn, and people don't like to learn from past errors or mistakes, I guess. I don't know anything about that. One thing that I bring from that period of time is a lot of patriotism, respect from our country, for our country and what we have, and it won't be here unless we continue to hold to some of the ideals that we had in World War II, even though they might seem outdated now. They're not really, because the things that we have now and can build on are things that we should remember. They weren't just given to us, they were earned, actually. And you have to build on what you have and keep going.
Well, my plans are to produce a film on women in war, and you'll be a part of that. And that's what my hopes are in the next 12 months or sooner. So I've been gathering stories for 5 years, and I think I've almost got enough stories now to put together a real nice film, along with all the other work that I've done. So,
are you just looking for the World War II war?
No. I just finished my first Vietnam film, Korea. I'm interviewing a lady later this week who was the first woman to be wounded in the National Guard in combat in Iraq and receive a Purple Heart. So there's a lot of different stories. World War II nurses, nurses of Vietnam, people that served in Korea. So I've got a lot of stories.
When we fought Congress to get our recognition, that I'm sure you've seen that bill, 95-202, which was September of 1977. And that is the bill under which we were recognized as veterans.
Right.
And the second group that recognized under that bill were the women telephone operators who served on the front lines in World War I. And we now have 31 groups of people recognized under that bill, as you said, some of the other groups. And it's only been about, 10 or 12 years ago that the nurses who served on Corregidor and Bataan, you know, they were volunteers, and their service was only recognized under our bill about 10 or 12 years ago. Have you seen the Veterans Benefits book? Or
I'm not sure if I have. I don't remember.
I should have brought you one. I could, because then you could see the different groups, you know, as they were recognized. And so there were lots of people who served without any recognition at all because they were, you know, civilians. And you can't find their records in the military either. You can't go to the military archives and find our records because they're not there. They didn't have them.
At the end of my interviews, I always ask for the veteran to give me a salute into the camera. When I tell you, can you do that? Give me just a second here. Just I'll tell you when I'm ready. Just give me a second here. Okay, look right into the camera. Give me a salute. Excellent. Very nice. Stay right there.